afternoon and good morning for you, Professor LeDoux. We are here to talk about science, about neuroscience, your subject, and about how science could help or create problems, new questions, or new problems, or give solutions on issues which are linked to ethics, morality, and law. And I've listened to an interview of yours with Michael Gazzaniga, and you discussed the question of free will. And free will is also the title of a song of your group, of the Amygdaloids. So,
right, yes.
Of course, we probably don't have an answer. We don't know how free is your will. The question is, do you think that science could help us now or in the future to answer to this kind of question?
Well, I think the role of science is to lay out what we know and what we don't know. And I think when you have that information, where we are today, what we understand about the brain and free will and so forth, we don't, as you said, we don't have an answer, but maybe we can think about behavior in a more complex way than simply yes or no. For example, if we take the kind of behaviors that I study primarily, which is responses to danger, we can identify maybe 5 or 6 levels of responses that go from the completely automatic to the more intentional and controlled. So the first level would be a reflex. So you step on something sharp, your leg withdraws. There's no consciousness involved there. You just respond because of the way your nerves are connected. The next level would be something like an instinctual behavior, like freezing behavior. You encounter a snake or a robber or a mugger on the street, and you see the danger posed by this person who is aggressive and about to attack you, and the first thing you do is you freeze. And as you freeze, you begin to think about what's happening. But that freezing response is an innate response to a sudden, unusual stimulus. So that's 2 levels. Another level is that we can learn how to behave in certain ways by the consequences of our action. So that's called goal-directed behavior or instrumental action outcome learning, whatever you want to call it. It's a kind of behavior that's acquired by its consequences. So if every time you go to a certain restaurant, you get a good meal, then you go back there because you've been rewarded for being there. But if you have a bad meal, you just stop going because the consequences were not good. So that's a kind of trial and error learning that we use, that animals use, especially mammals use, to learn about what's useful and not useful in the world. Now, another level, though, would be a habit, which is one of these goal-directed behaviors that's been acquired by their consequences, but that's become so routine, every time you see the stimulus, you perform the action, not because you've been conditioned to it, like, a tone that's paired with a shock will cause freezing. That's not the same thing. A habit is a behavior that was goal-directed and achieved a goal, but over time has become so routinized and so often occurring that it's no longer related to the goal. For example, smoking a cigarette. Maybe you enjoyed it at first, but now you do it all the time because you can't stop because it's become a habit. So then the next level will be using a kind of mental model. So we create an understanding of the world in our minds. Now, our minds have non-conscious or unconscious mental models, but also conscious mental models. A non-conscious mental model might be your cognitive map or spatial map of Rome. So you know where the streets are and where to get around. So you use that map in your head to navigate how to get to the restaurant you want to go to. You don't have to think about it. You just have that information and you go there. But you are using information that you've stored and are calling upon it internally. It's not the stimulus so much. I mean, you're using the streets to kind of guide where you go, but it's the map that tells you where to make the turns and so forth. So, but that's all done unconsciously. Now, we can also consciously decide, let's say I don't know the way to the restaurant, but someone told me to make 3 right turns and 2 left turns. I can remember that information and say, okay, I took a right, now I'm taking a left, and now I'm taking another right. So we're kind of bringing in a higher level of decision-making there. And all of those can probably come into play in a criminal situation where you might have a reflexive response because somebody startles you and you hit them and knock them out, and so they accuse you of assault.
Yes, that is exactly one of the points I wanted to talk about, because, for instance, about self-defense, which is an issue which is very often discussed in the States, but in Italy too. So self-defense could be exactly what you told. So you react without consciousness, without thinking. It's just automatic. So in a way, the responsibility is something different. You're not planning to hurt someone or to shot someone if you have a gun. Right. You just do it.
Right. So, the fact is, most of our behavior is controlled non-consciously. And that's kind of a problem for the law, because there's it's my body that's performing the behavior, but my conscious mind is not. So who am I? Am I my conscious mind, or am I my whole body? Because the law treats it as pretty much you are one thing. And for the most part, we are one thing. But there is a different, perhaps the only part of our brain or our body that is not in perfect tune with the rest of the brain and the body is our conscious mind. Because, I think it's true that the human conscious mind is the only entity in the history of evolution, the 4 billion years of evolutionary history, that has ever been able to make a decision that goes against the greater good of one's body. So, for example, to commit suicide, there's really no convincing evidence that animals commit suicide. There are certain behaviors that certain animals perform, but there's no way you could know whether that animal is choosing to end its own life. Because to even know that a life has an end is a complicated thing. We have a kind of brain that allows us to know we have a beginning and there's an end coming at some point. And so we guide our behavior on the basis of, when we're going to die. We plan, we work, and we get older, we stop working, we've saved enough money. So we think that will allow us to get to the point when we die. So we have a lot of thoughts about death that are based on our assumptions about, what death is going to be. So to choose not to live is a very complicated thing, because it means the billions of cells in your body have given up their rights to your conscious thoughts.
Yeah.
And whereas all of those cells are working to keep your body alive. You have a virus, the body's cells are trying to fight that virus to keep you alive. No matter what you're doing, that's what your body is trying to do, keep you alive. And yet the conscious mind can say, no, I'm done with that. I'm going to kill all of the billion other cells because I don't want to live anymore. So this one little part of the mind is controlling the destiny of the rest of the body. So when we go to court,
we can do something which is very dangerous for us for the sake of someone else, or to do our duty, thinking about doctors now in the pandemic situation. Right.
Absolutely.
You go in the most dangerous places, which is counterintuitive, absolutely.
Yes.
because we feel we have a duty to do so.
Right. So the conscious mind is a beautiful thing. I mean, it has great properties, but it also allows for narcissism, for greed, envy, hatred. And so, it's a complicated thing.
And
it has good points and bad.
Another thing, I've seen a video where you spoke about meditation. We usually are never in the present. We always think about something we are going to do afterwards, or we have just done. So it's very difficult for us to be in the very moment where we live.
Yeah, that's true, because we have a prefrontal cortex that's an area up here in the brain that is able to envision the future, and that allows us to do great things, to design a house, build a building, write a novel, write a song, play a flute, whatever you're going to do. In a very, it's a very creative process. You imagine something that doesn't exist and you make it. Other animals have the very limited ability to, structure their world. I mean, the animals make nests and so forth, but they don't build, the Empire State Building, or they don't write an opera. And one of our greatest talents is our ability to envision the future and move towards it. But that's also the source of our greatest problems, which is worry. We worry. The reason
anxiety.
we worry is because we have a brain that can see the future.
And crime as well, because as we are talking in a way about crime, animals can kill, other animals can kill, but they cannot plan a murder. So responsibility is something different if you plan in advance. It's conscious. I mean, it's not a reaction. It's not fear or danger or whatever.
So planning is an interesting topic. So, we started by working from the bottom and going to the top about what kinds of about behavioral control. But we can also ask the question of, might we be able to have unconscious plans, non-conscious plans? In other words, every conscious thought is based on what was just non-conscious. Your thoughts are being shaped, and then all of a sudden it is in your conscious mind. But that means that some of the plan is happening underneath, and your conscious mind is just getting the story from the unconscious mind. So it's a very complicated, difficult issue when it comes to making a decision about, is someone responsible? Because what level of the mind and brain are we going to judge responsibility at? Obviously, if someone is literally premeditative, I'm planning to do this, I'm going to kill that person, then that's a straightforward case where the conscious mind has done that. But there can be cases, there can be planning that takes place non-consciously. We know that from cognitive science, that a lot of planning of routine things happens non-consciously. If you have some bad history with someone, I imagine, I don't have proof of this, but I imagine there could be a kind of non-conscious planning that is shaped by your bad history with that person, so that ultimately, when it becomes premeditated, it's almost a fait accompli, that the plan was made and now you're conscious of that plan, and so you carry it out. I'm not saying that we don't start sometimes with the conscious thought of, okay, now I'm going to do it. At some
point it becomes conscious.
Sorry?
If you have to plan something, at some point it's going to become conscious. If you buy some poison or buy a gun in a shop.
But if you have
that's conscious.
If you're creating your mind is creating ideas, so you might have the thought of, not a conscious thought, but the concept of buying poison may be working underneath. This is not in a Freudian way. It's just the way memory works. So memory and conception are operating non-consciously. And, so if I'm writing a book, the thoughts are, do you know the art critic Roland Barthes? Roland Barthes, French art critic.
Roland Barthes, oui.
So he said, the writer doesn't write, the language writes. So the writer is just a kind of a vehicle for carrying out what's in the mind.
It's what in psychology is called flow, in a way.
Flow would be a kind of extreme example.
On autopilot.
Yeah, autopilot of that you're writing and you like what you're writing, but you're not planning every word. It's like you have a concept, and that concept is living before you start writing because it's based on what you know and what you understand. So a person that has a concept of poison and an association of that concept of poison with some person, then that information can be, coming together non-consciously, and the conscious act is just the last resort.
Okay, but do you think that this could change the idea of responsibility? So it's for the law, they should take into consideration these different aspects.
Well, I'm just laying out what the science is, and then in terms of responsibility, we have to decide what the person is. Is the person, the conscious mind, the level just before consciousness as well? Or does it include your habits and your passions and your hatreds and other things that might be, below the conscious level that don't ever necessarily come up, but may cause you to prime you in a certain way? We know that the memory phenomenon of priming takes place non-consciously. So if I give you, classic example would be something like, I give you the letters U-R-S-E, and I show you a picture of a hospital, and so you put an N there, so that's nurse. But if I show you some money, you write purse. So the stimulus primes you to complete a piece of information that is already in your mind. So you might have these ideas, these concepts in your mind, and in the presence of a stimulus, someone you don't like, that concept is brought together and tips you in a certain way. You didn't do it intentionally. It just, your mind did it, your brain did it, but how much of you, your conscious mind, is that? So before we can answer that question, we have to decide. This is kind of like, the abortion argument. When does life begin? And that's a terribly complicated argument.
So one thing science tells us is that everything is much more complicated than
that's right.
Which is important, actually, because oversimplify is very dangerous.
I think what, for courts, the more that the jury understands how complicated it is, makes the prosecutor's job much harder. But it may also, make it safer for people, because it's, if you don't have a full understanding of where behavior comes from, it's almost criminal to send someone to jail without that understanding and making a decision based on that understanding.
So
and we don't have a full understanding, but we have some.
One thing you discussed with Professor Gazzaniga is if punishment is useful as an efficient way to deal with crime, because the idea of course is to prevent crime or to keep people safe from crime.
Right. Well,
of course, we don't have an answer. It's just a discussion, but I think it's an important one.
Right. There's I don't know exactly. I haven't followed child psychology in a long time, But I know for a long time, and when I first got into the field, there was a strong sentiment that punishment does not get your child to do what you want. You know, you have to use positive reinforcement as well. I mean, sometimes you have to, be a little negative, but that, if you are too harsh, it just like creates helplessness. So, in terms of adults, we have better understanding, so we should be more responsible than a child. But punishment is, I don't know what the statistics are. I'm not an expert in law and the brain and all of that stuff. So I don't know what the statistics are on how severe punishment is, the severity of punishment and the outcome in terms of what happens to a person when they get out of jail. I don't know. I would think that, the principle of learned helplessness is very important, though. The more helpless you feel, the less opportunity you have to, change yourself.
And to improve, yes. Before you spoke about fear, and now in the pandemic situation, we have a feeling that fear is even an instrument of social control. Most of us are doing things that we never thought about doing, closing in our houses or sheltering or not getting out, not kissing friends, because we are scared.
Yeah.
So we are rediscovering this emotion, in a way, because we never have been, my generation, I'm 60, we have never been so scared in our life.
Right.
It's something new.
Yeah. Well, any new threat that is so severe is going to be, it's going to be, anything that's new is potentially dangerous. And this is a particularly dangerous new thing. So, yeah, a lot of people are afraid. I'm afraid, I'm worried. And we just we have no, it's really anxiety. We've never seen the virus, right? It's not, fear is usually thought of as an emotion that occurs when you're in the presence of danger. You've got a mugger there. We don't know when we're in the presence of the virus. So this is anxiety. It's worry about what hasn't happened yet. We don't want to get the virus. And so we're worried about how to behave in order not to get it.
But it's even worse because we never know when we can feel safe.
Right. Yes.
So you wrote a book about danger.
Yes. So
it's important for our evolution.
Yes. So the point of the book was that if we start with people and start asking, well, how far back in evolution does danger go? Well, yes, other animals respond to danger, and trees, plants respond to danger. They withdraw their roots and conserve energy when it's too hot and so forth. But bacteria also respond to danger, and so bacteria are basically the oldest living organisms on Earth. They began about 3.7 or 8 billion years ago, and they've been alive ever since. And to get through the day, to survive, they have to detect danger, incorporate nutrients, balance fluids and ions, thermoregulate, and reproduce. Those are the same things we do. We eat, drink, thermoregulate, go inside, turn on the air conditioner, use thermoregulation in your body as well. We reproduce. So the things that keep us alive are the same that keep a bacteria alive. This has nothing to do with psychology. But when we eat, we enjoy eating. So we think of hunger and taste and those things as pleasurable. Hunger is unpleasant. Taste as pleasurable. We think of danger as fearful. We think of sex as enjoyable. We think of being too cold or too hot, in a certain psychological way. But the psychology of that is a kind of afterthought. The whole point of that is to keep you alive, not to make you feel good or bad. And to feel good or bad, you have to have a brain that can know that that experience is happening to you. And that's something the human brain is especially good at, is being self-aware, to know that the snake is going to bite me, or to know that the virus is going to infect me. If you don't know it's going to infect you, if you aren't the recipient of the danger, then there's no fear. So, it's often said that fear is universal, because you see people around the world, they're all expressing fear faces. We see a lot of that about fear faces around the world. But I don't think it's fear that's universal. It's danger that's universal. Fear is the conscious experience you have when you're in danger. And that is something that is very personal, because my experience of fear is different from yours, because we've led different lives and have come to understand fear in slightly different ways. And that's true across cultures as well. So even though we can take a word like fear and translate it into Italian, what's the Italian word for fear?
Paura. Paura.
That's okay. And so you have that, in French you have something else, in Swahili something else. And so all of these cultures experience fear in different ways slightly. But because we have a word we can translate across languages, we think it's the same experience. But every culture is different. So fear is individual and cultural. It's not innate. It's not given to us by evolution. Evolution gives us the ability to understand danger, to respond and detect and respond to danger. But fear is our personal construction, given who we are, the culture we live in, the world we live in, our understanding of what danger is.
Okay, so said, maybe law should use science, but also culture, because you said experience, unconscious experience are different for any one of us. And of course, if you judge someone, you must consider what really happened. So you must take into consideration all these different aspects. Science could be useful, of course.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, in the end, we are simply a product of our genes and our experience. And, I don't know how much the courts, we don't know enough about genes to say that, okay, this gene caused you to do that. There's no gene that makes you do anything. But genes assemble your brain. And so they assemble it in a certain way. Experiences modify that genetic background of the brain. And we are certainly products of our experience. And I think that's why, social programs are important, because they recognize that everybody is not the same, that, we are the same as people, but we all have different experiences. And some people need more help than others because they just didn't have the opportunities. So I'm not saying that we're ready to make a law on the basis of any of the things I'm talking about, because I don't know anything about the law. And I'm not.
Neuroscience is entering the court already, because they use brain scan. They use genetic as well. This can help? This is going to improve our knowledge, or
I don't think we're ready for that. I don't think we're ready to read minds from brain scans. Personally, I've never accepted an invitation to be an expert witness, because I think we don't know enough. We know a little bit, and a little bit is enough to get you in trouble. I think it's, what neuroscience can provide is, okay, this is what we know about how the brain works. But it can't say this person killed somebody or didn't kill somebody. That's just, we're not there.